This is your challenge. Try to watch this entire video, from beginning to end, without falling asleep. It's just a slow, boring story about the final day of a plague doctor in 1348. No jump scares, no drama, just silence and memory. It was the year 1348, and the morning fog had grown so thick over the streets of Florence that even the birds had stopped trying to sing. The silence was suffocating. Beneath the white veil of mist, bones clicked faintly beneath wheels, carting away what used to be citizens. He had stopped counting the dead a long time ago. The doctor's name had once mattered. Now, he was simply the crow, whispered by frightened eyes peeking behind shutters. His long black coat, stiff with filth, creaked as he moved through the empty alleys. The beaked mask, once worn with professional pride, now trapped the scent of rot, lavender and herb stuffed. Inside, it had lost their power weeks ago. He awoke that morning not with purpose, but with obligation. If he didn't walk, he would remember, and remembering was the cruelest plague of all. His hands trembled as he dipped them into vinegar and ash, a pathetic attempt to feel clean. His assistant had died 3 days prior, coughing until he drowned in his own lungs. Since then, the doctor had stopped talking. He carried silence like a shield. Outside, the city was unrecognizable. Bakeries were boarded up. Churches rang no bells. The street performers, the laughter of the city, had long since vanished. He passed a dog chewing on a silk slipper, its owner likely discarded nearby. The beast growled but didn't run. Even animals, he thought, had grown bold with death in the air. Every morning, he followed the same route. First, the convent where 3 sisters still lived, silent, pale, their eyes like wet glass. Then the plague house, where the sick lay in rows like firewood. Finally, the outskirts, where no one dare go, and where the dying begged not to be taken. Today would be no different, and yet he felt something shift, something colder than usual, as if death itself had paused to watch him walk. In his leather pouch, he carried a small book of names, each one he'd tried to save, each one now crossed out. He stared at it for a long moment, thumb tracing the dried blood smeared across the last page. There was no space left, no new names to write, no one left to try. A scream echoed faintly from the western gate. High, shrill, then cut short. He didn't flinch. He hadn't run to screams in days. Instead, he adjusted the strap of his mask and pressed forward, boots echoing hollow through the lifeless stone street. The fog followed him. Or perhaps he carried it with him. Tonight, he thought, maybe the night he doesn't return. He arrived at the convent just as the sun began to burn to the fog, revealing walls stained with age and sorrow. The garden, once overflowing with basil and rosemary, now held only brittle stalks and half-dug graves. A lone crow perched on the cracked statue of St. Lucia, pecking at something in its claws. The doctor did not look closely. He knocked, out of habit, not necessity. No one answered doors anymore. He let himself in, greeted by the pungent scent of vinegar, death, and damp stone. The air was colder inside than out. The 3 sisters remained exactly where he had last seen them, one seated, hands clasped in silent prayer. The second sprawled near the altar, her eyes wide open and unfocused. The third was in bed, her lips moving slowly, repeating words that no longer made sense. He approached the one in bed, Sister Beatrice. She had once sung hymns with a voice that softened even his hollow heart. Now, her skin was grayish-yellow, her fingers too thin to lift the cup he offered. He sat beside her without speaking, letting her repeat her whispered litany. He did not know the words. Perhaps she didn't either. On the floor beside her bed was a doll, cloth torn and soaked, a reminder that Sister Beatrice had not always been a nun. She had once been a child, too, before vows, before pestilence. He removed his gloves and checked her fever. It was rising fast. She would not survive the night. Still, he replaced her compress and left a small folded linen near her chest, a token he no longer believed helped but couldn't stop giving. From the altar, the second sister moaned, a low, guttural sound that echoed to the empty nave. Her eyes rolled back, hands twitching violently. The doctor hesitated. He could stop it. One quick gesture. Mercy. But instead, he turned away. Outside, the crow had not moved. It watched him descend the steps, its feathers glistening like tar. The wind picked up, carrying with the stench of the southern quarter, where the burn pit smoked day and night. He tightened his coat, pulled the mask tighter. Even now, after months, the smell made his stomach twist. He walked. Each step away from the convent felt heavier, as if some part of him remained behind. Perhaps that was the nature of this work. To leave yourself behind, piece by piece, with the dying. He turned onto St. Marguerite's Lane, a street where shutters were nailed shut and doors hung open. Silence lingered here like fog. The only movement came from rats. So many rats. His hand went instinctively to the small pouch tied beneath his coat. Inside a few clove pods, a wax-sealed letter he could no longer read, and a rusted key. He carried it always, though he no longer remembered what it unlocked. He reached the plague house by mid-morning. The plague house stood like a wounded giant at the edge of St. Marguerite's Lane. Its timbers bowed, its windows sealed with wax and cloth. A crude red X had been painted across the door in thick strokes, as though it could scare death away. It didn't. He paused before entering, not out of fear, but to prepare himself. Each visit here pulled something essential from him, and yet it was his duty, not as a doctor, but as a witness, to prove, perhaps only to himself, that someone had stayed. The stench hit him instantly, a fetid stew of rot, sweat, and waste. He lit the stub of a beeswax candle and stepped inside. The main room was dim, lit only by flickering lamps that burned fish oil. Cots lined the walls, once 6, now more than 20, crammed wherever space permitted. The groans, the coughs, the wheezing filled the air like a funeral choir. He moved between the bodies methodically. Most were asleep or in some liminal space between dreams and death. He adjusted pillows, wiped sweat from foreheads, placed drops of vinegar beneath noses to jolt the nearly past. No one thanked him. They hadn't the strength or the hope. A boy no older than 10 clutched a wooden horse carved crudely from driftwood. He opened his eyes as the doctor approached and smiled weakly. "Is it over?" he whispered. The doctor froze. He'd heard the question countless times, but it never came from a young. He placed a cool rag on the boy's forehead and nodded, almost. He couldn't lie convincingly anymore. In the farthest corner lay a woman wrapped in layers of wool. Her skin had darkened, bruised by plague boils that stretched along her neck and jaw. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were clear. "Doctor," she rasped. He knelt beside her. "Yes." She reached out, bony fingers wrapping around his gloved hand. "I want you to remember me." He nodded. "What's your name?" he asked. "Margot," she said, her voice trembling, "of the Western Wall. My husband was a baker." He scribbled it down in the book. A rare entry. There hadn't been a new name in days. He underlined it twice. Margot smiled. "Tell them I tried to stay kind." He nodded again. A loud crash echoed from the upper floor. A wooden beam collapsing, perhaps. He didn't move. The house was falling, piece by piece, and he knew it wouldn't be standing much longer. He left Margot with a folded scrap of linen beneath her hand. By noon, he had cleaned wounds, wrapped arms, and laid coins on 4 closed eyes. The copper was a gift from the city, meant to be buried with the dead. So Sharon would ferry them across. The irony was bitter. There was no one left to bury anyone. Before leaving, he washed his hands in a bowl of wine. Red, diluted, bitter. Outside, the world had grown brighter, but not warmer. He turned his eyes to the hills beyond the plague house. In the distance, smoke rose, not from hearths, but from pyres. It was time to walk toward the edge of the city, toward the place he feared most. The road to the city's edge had once been a lively market path. Musicians, florists, lovers. Now it was nothing but dust and the long shadows of things forgotten. The doctor's boots crushed petals that had fallen not from bouquets, but from grave offerings scattered by the wind. He walked in silence, his leather coat heavy with more than dirt. Around him, the fields lay in ruin, wildflowers tangled with weeds, scarecrows falling apart mid-gesture, like they too had surrendered. He passed a stone well. Its rope had been cut, the bucket missing. On its side, someone had scrawled in coal. We drank until the silence answered back. Farther ahead, at the threshold of the hills, was a wooden fence marked with talismans. Dried garlic, shards of broken mirrors, tiny cloth dolls pinned with thorns. Fear left its fingerprints everywhere. A woman stood at the gate. Her shawl fluttered in the breeze, her face mostly hidden. She did not move as he approached. "You're late," she said softly. He stopped. The voice struck a chord. He tilted his head, studying her beneath the mask. "Do I know you?" She stepped forward just enough for the sun to catch her cheek, pale, drawn, but unmistakably familiar. "You once treated my husband, gave him laudanum to sleep." The doctor said nothing. He didn't remember, not precisely, but the guilt stirred anyway. "He died screaming," she added. "I'm sorry." She didn't answer, only pointed toward the woods beyond. They gathered there now, the ones who refused to be taken. He followed her hand. In the distance, through the breaks in the trees, small shapes moved, slowly, cautiously. A village of exiles. The untouched? The forgotten? He could no longer tell the difference. "You shouldn't go," she said. "That is why I must." He stepped past her. She didn't stop him. The trees closed around him like a mouth. Twigs snapped beneath his feet. Birds scattered above. The deeper he went, the less of the sky he saw. The path was barely visible, only hinted at by footprints in worn stones. He passed a crude shelter made of broken carts and cloth. Inside, a man lay curled, eyes open, lips cracked and whispering prayers in a language the doctor didn't know. He left a clove pod near the man's head and moved on. Voices drifted from deeper in the woods. Whispers that didn't want to be heard, coughing that hadn't yet faded. He arrived at a clearing. More than a dozen people sat or lay beneath makeshift tents. Children hid behind their mothers. An old man clutched a stick like a weapon. They all looked at him the same way, with a mix of hatred, reverence, and fear. He raised a hand. I'm not here to take anyone, only to see, to remember. A young boy with hollow eyes stepped forward. Will you tell the city we're here? No. The boy nodded and returned to shadows. He moved among them, offering compresses, wiping fevered brows, whispering names when they gave them. Some refused his touch. Others begged for it. As he left, a young girl clutched his coat. Are you a ghost? He looked down. Not yet. She released him. Back on the road, the sun had begun its descent. The world seemed more golden than ever, a final cruelty, beauty on the edge of ruin. He turned toward the center of the city, where the sun died behind the towers. He had one more place to visit before the day ended. At the city's northern edge, where walls once stood strong and patrols kept peace, now rose the blackened skeleton of what had been Florence's old watchtower. Fire had claimed it early in the plague, when desperate citizens thought smoke might cleanse the air. It hadn't. The doctor approached it as one might approach a grave, not with fear, but with the weight of memory. The ground here was scorched. Charcoal crunched beneath his boots. The air, strangely, carried no scent at all, as though even the wind refused to linger. He paused at the base of the tower. The stones were cracked. The staircase inside partially collapsed. Yet he began to climb, each step groaning under his weight. Rats scattered ahead of him, tails vanishing into darkness. The shadows inside moved with a pulse of their own. About halfway up, he reached a flat platform where once guards had rested. Now, it held only ash and a single iron bench. He sat. From here, the city was a ruinous mosaic. Tiled roofs caved in, streets like veins carved between lifeless buildings. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from distant pyres. The Arno River, once bustling with boats and trade, reflected only silence now. He removed his mask. It was the first time in weeks. His face was sunken, pale. A beard had begun to grow again, patchy and silvering. His eyes were tired beyond years, not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying the weight of so many ends. He let the wind hit his skin, cold and dry. It carried with it the fragments of lost prayers, the dust of lost families. He listened. In the distance, a bell rang once. A mistake? A ghost? Or maybe the wind had struck bronze. Either way, it echoed too clearly. He opened his notebook, the one filled with names. He flipped back to the first page. The ink there had begun to fade. So many names. He whispered each one aloud, as if speaking them could return them. Alessandro, Berta, Paolo, Livia, and so on. His voice cracked. He stopped after 20 names. The rest, he would read tonight, if he made it tonight. He stood, placing the book beside him for a moment. Something caught his eye. Carved into the railing of the platform was a phrase. If no one remembers you, did you ever live at all? He ran his fingers across the words, then picked up the book, tighter this time. He descended, back on the ground. The light had begun to die. Shadows stretched like fingers across the streets. The fog returned, curling up from the cobblestones as if Florence itself exhaled. He needed to return home. Not to rest. There was no rest anymore. but to prepare for the night. He passed a bakery whose door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, loaves of bread had long turned to stone, covered in mold like velvet. A child's shoe lay in the gutter. He didn't stop. The final stretch to his quarters felt longer than it should have. Time thickened at the end of the day. The crows were louder now, dozens circling the tower he had just left, crying out into the dying light. He did not look back. The doctor's home sat nestled between the candlemaker's ruin and a chapel that had lost its congregation. The front door was reinforced with iron bands, a precaution he'd installed long ago when people still believed they could be robbed of anything but their breath. He didn't lock it anymore. There was nothing left to take. Inside, the room was small, tight, filled with the scent of oil and dry herbs. A single chair sat beside a writing desk covered in papers, some with ink still fresh, others yellowing and brittle. A stack of clean linen, carefully folded, rested atop a crate. The only luxury was a bowl of dried apples, mostly untouched. Hunger had become an afterthought. He removed his coat, then his gloves. His hands were gaunt, fingers stiff, skin flaking from the constant washings. He placed the gloves on the table, aligning them perfectly beside the wax seal stamp he had not used in weeks. On a hook by the door hung another mask, older, cracked, with a longer beak. He looked at it for a long time before turning away. That one had belonged to someone else. He lit a candle. The room filled with gold and shadow. Then he sat at the desk, opening his notebook once more. The pages sighed as he flipped to the middle. Margot's name still glistened faintly, recently written. He drew a line beneath it. He began to write. Today, I saw no miracles, only echoes. The convent is quieter than ever. The plague house is full, but none cry anymore. And beyond the city and the woods, there are those who still believe they might be spared. I envy them, not for their health, but for their belief. He paused. The city has stopped fighting. It is not death we fear now, but irrelevance, to pass unnoticed, to become nothing more than bones without stories. A knock, soft, barely audible. His heart stuttered. He rose slowly, candle in hand, and approached the door. He opened it just a sliver. A child stood there, a girl no older than 8, barefoot, with a bundle in her arms. Her eyes were red from crying. She held out the bundle. "Please," she said, voice shaking. "She's cold. Please make her better." The doctor looked down. The bundle was a cat, limp, breast shallow. Its fur was damp, matted. He opened the door wider. "Come in," he whispered. The girl stepped inside without hesitation. He cleared a spot on the table, gently placing the cat on a cloth. Its sides moved barely. Fevered, maybe poisoned, maybe sick from the plague itself. He did what he could. Warm compress, crushed herbs, a drop of watered wine to soothe. The girl watched him with eyes too large for her face. "Will she live?" she asked. "I don't know." She nodded. "I'll wait." He gave her a piece of dried apple, which she took but didn't eat. Instead, she curled up in the corner, clutching her knees. The doctor sat again, watching the candle melt. Time passed. At some point, the girl fell asleep, her head resting on her folded arms. The cat breathed, slowly, but it breathed. He did not write again that night. He watched the flame burn down to a stub, and for the first time in months, he whispered a prayer, not for salvation, but for a morning. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, yet when he opened his eyes, pale sunlight was pouring through the cracks in the shutter. For a moment, brief, fragile, he forgot what world he lived in. The silence was too clean. The air, though heavy, was not foul. The girl was gone. So was the cat. For a second, he wondered if they had ever been real. But the cloth was still warm, the apple core bitten, and near the door a ribbon, red and frayed, lay like a thank you. He picked it up and tucked it into his pouch. He didn't understand why. Outside, the day had begun with an unnatural stillness, the kind of quiet that should follow snow, though no snow had fallen. He stepped into the street, mask in place, and scanned the empty alley. The city looked frozen, not lifeless, but paused, as if even death had taken a breath. He made his way toward the square. No destination, only motion. Something about the silence unnerved him more than screams. At the fountain in the center of the plaza, a woman knelt. Her face was turned away, her shoulders trembling. He approached slowly. "Do you need help?" he asked. She didn't turn. Instead, she placed something on the stone rim of the fountain, a bundle of letters tied with twine. She stood and walked away without answering, vanishing into one of the alleys like a ghost. He picked up the bundle. The parchment was worn, the ink smudged but legible. The first page read, "To whomever finds me, please remember that I once lived, that I once sang, that I loved." He held the letters tightly, unsure whether to read more. He placed them in his coat. Behind him, a church bell rang. Once, twice. No one had rung the bells in months. He turned slowly. At the old cathedral's tower, a figure stood, robed, thin, ringing with slow purpose. He couldn't make out their face, only the deliberate swing of the rope. The toll echoed through Florence like thunder across a battlefield. 3, 4. No rush, no panic, just a rhythm, steady, funereal. He walked toward the sound, compelled. The cathedral door stood open. Dust hung in the air like mist. The pews were broken, some smashed. Paintings wept faded pigment down their frames. The crucifix above the altar had split cleanly in half, and yet candles burned. Someone had lit them. He moved down the aisle. At the altar, a book rested, not the Bible, a journal. He opened it. Each page was filled with names, dates, final words, prayers, laments, notes from a priest who had stayed long after his flock had vanished. The last entry was dated 4 days ago. No one came today. But still, I rang the bells. Perhaps someone will hear. Perhaps even God listens when cities fall. The doctor closed the journal. He took the candle nearest to him and placed it in his coat pouch. Not to light anything, but as proof that flames still lived here. He stepped back into the street. The bells had stopped. He continued walking. The day felt longer than others. Maybe it only seemed that way because he still stood. At a crossroad, he saw something that hadn't existed the day before. A rose, fresh, red, resting on a windowsill untouched by dust or rot. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he stood there uncertain, watching it sway in the breath of the wind. He began to walk again, slower now. Something was coming. He didn't know what, but it wore the silence like a cloak. The sun sat higher now, though it provided no warmth. Its pale light stretched shadows across the city like strands of ink slowly dripping down a page. The streets felt too quiet, too precise, as though rehearsed. Every breath echoed. Every step felt like trespass. As he turned toward the old apothecary row, he noticed a figure standing still at the far end of the alley, cloaked, hooded, unmoving. His instinct was to turn, but something deeper, something wordless, urged him forward. He walked slowly, keeping his gloved hand near his belt where the knife still rested, though rusted and useless. As he approached, he noticed the figure was thin, tall, wrapped entirely in black. Not a plague doctor's garb. Something older than science, older than faith. "Are you lost?" the doctor asked. The figure did not reply. He stepped closer. "Do you need help?" Still silence. And then the figure raised its head. Beneath the hood was not a face. Not truly. Not skin. It was as if the shadows themselves had pulled together the vague idea of a face. Eyes where they should be. A shape of a mouth, but no detail. Like staring into memory. The doctor froze. He didn't know whether he was speaking to someone real or to something that had been waiting for him. The figure finally spoke, voice soft and strangely familiar. "You have walked far." The doctor nodded. "I was trained to." "And yet you are tired." "Yes." "You carry names." He reached into his coat and pulled the notebook slowly. "They asked me to remember." "And you have." The figure took a step forward. "Do you know who remembers you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. He didn't answer. The figure's mouth moved, though no breath left it. When the last one forgets your name, that is when you truly vanish. The doctor felt his knees weaken. "Then, perhaps I already have," he whispered. "No," said the figure. "You are remembered by those you stood beside, even if they are gone." The doctor swallowed hard. "Then why do I still walk?" The figure tilted its head. To finish, it extended a hand, thin, impossibly long fingers, and placed something small and round in the doctor's palm. A stone, smooth, warm. He looked down. Carved into its surface was a single letter, M. He looked back up. The figure was gone. The alley was empty. Only the stone remained, pulsing softly in his hand like a heartbeat. He placed it in the pouch beside the red ribbon and the candle stub. And for the first time in days, he felt weight leave his shoulders, not the burden of memory, but the sense that perhaps, just maybe, someone was still watching, not to judge, but to bear witness. He turned back toward the city center. There was something he still needed to do. He didn't know what yet, but his feet knew where to go. His feet led him down a narrow street he hadn't walked in months. The buildings leaned in close, whispering secrets with every creak of timber and flicker of broken shutters. Time had aged the street differently. Less decay, more memory. He paused before a small, pale house. Its door was blue, the paint chipped, the knocker rusted, but it stood firm, as though untouched by the fevered winds of the city's collapse. He knew this door. He hadn't meant to come here, hadn't planned it, but his body had moved with old instinct. Familiar paths etched deep into his muscle and memory. He knocked once. Silence. He knocked again, lighter. Still nothing. Then the door creaked open. Not fully, just enough to let light hit the dust swirling inside. No one stood there. He entered. The air smelled of dried flowers and forgotten candles. Inside, the house was dim but not dead. The furniture still stood where it always had. A teacup rested on a lace cloth, untouched. A shawl was draped neatly over a chair, as though its owner had simply stepped outside for a moment. This was his wife's home. Once, long before the mask, before the plague, before names had become burdens. He hadn't been here since she had left for the countryside to escape the sickness. She had taken their daughter, promised to write, promised to wait. No letters had come, no word at all. He had assumed the worst, because assuming anything else was more painful. But now, a sound came from the back room, soft, like a breath, or a sigh. He moved toward it, unsure if he wanted to find anything at all. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Inside was a small cot neatly made. A child's drawings hung crooked on the wall. Sons, horses, stick figures with too many fingers. On the bed sat a doll. It was hand-stitched with a button eye and a crooked smile. It had belonged to his daughter. He sat on the edge of the bed, carefully picking up the doll. A lump rose in his throat. The scent here was different: lavender, oil, and something else. Hope. He didn't cry. He didn't know how anymore. But his hands trembled as he stood and placed the doll in his coat. There was no sign they had ever returned. But there was no sign of death either. And that somehow was worse. He stood in the doorway for a long time, tried to decide whether to lock the door behind him. In the end, he left it open, in case they ever came back. Or in case he did. Back outside, the city felt louder. Crows shrieked overhead. A bell rang again, distant and uncertain. He turned toward the sound. He was nearly done. Only one place left. The one he had never dared to return to. The hospital. The hospital loomed in the northern quarter of the city like a mausoleum built before its time. Its facade, once whitewashed and welcoming, now bore the cracks and its scars of neglect. Vines crept up its flanks, gripping its surface like veins on a dying body. He hadn't set foot here since the second wave, since the screaming, since the fire, and his own steps felt foreign on the hospital steps. He paused, resting his hand against the wooden door, tracing the grain like it could speak back to him. It didn't. The door groaned as it opened, not from disuse. Someone had been here. Inside, the hallway stretched in eerie quiet. The faint smell of lye and burnt cloth still lingered. Some beds remained in place, others broken, overturned, or soaked in what the walls dared not remember. He passed through the triage chamber first. Tables lined with scorched linens, cabinets left half open. Someone had been scavenging for supplies or for hope. He couldn't tell. He reached the operating room. The lantern still hung from the ceiling, long since dry of oil. The tiles beneath his boots were stained dark brown, once red. The table in the center of the room had been turned over, its straps frayed. A tray of rusted tools sat beside it, untouched but threatening. And yet, what made him freeze was a pair of shoes beneath the table. Small, child's. He bent down, fingers brushing the worn leather. His breath caught. His daughter had worn shoes like these. He stood up too quickly, dizzy, the world spinning in shades of gray and blood. "No," he whispered to the air. She wasn't here. She couldn't have been. And then he heard it. A voice. Small, humming, coming from the ward down the hall. His body moved without permission. Faster now, breath shallow. The ward was lit faintly by a line of broken windows where the sun slipped through. Curtains flapped like ghosts in the stale wind. There, near the last bed, a figure sat. A girl, back turned to him, hair tangled, swaying slightly, humming a lullaby, the same one his wife used to sing. He approached, unsure if his feet touched the floor anymore. "Hello," he said. The girl paused but did not turn. He reached out. "Are you?" The bed was empty. The chair was empty. Only the humming remained, coming from everywhere and nowhere. His hands trembled. He gripped the bed frame, grounding himself. There was nothing here, only echoes. He lowered himself onto the floor beside the bed and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he let silence fill him completely. Not as a shield, but as surrender. Minutes passed, maybe hours. When he rose again, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ward. He stepped back into the hallway, and there, beside the front door, something had been left. A rose, not wilted, not dusty, fresh, the same as the one from the window. He picked it up and placed it in his pouch. He walked out of the hospital and didn't look back. The city felt smaller now. Or maybe he had grown too large for it. There was only one place left, the place where his story would end. He left the city without fanfare. No doors opened to watch him pass. No bird sang above the crumbling rooftops. Only the soft rhythm of his steps and the subtle clink of glass and metal in his satchel kept him company. The path to the hill was older than Florence itself, a forgotten trail that led upward toward the cypress trees where play carts had once emptied their burden. The locals called it the Hill of Silence, not for its peace, but because no prayers had ever been answered there. He climbed slowly, each step more difficult than the last. The wind picked up as he ascended, tugging at his coat, whistling to the buckles of his mask. He reached the top by dusk. From there, he could see everything. The crooked skyline of the city, the ruins of towers, the smoke of pyres rising faintly even now. It was not beautiful, but it was real, and it was his. The field atop the hill was littered with stones, not graves, just markers. People had stopped burying the dead when the ground hardened with bodies. Now, they marked them only when there was time or memory enough. He wandered through them, trailing his fingers over names etched hastily in soft rock, sometimes with just initials, sometimes with nothing at all. Here lay the forgotten, but he hadn't forgotten. He sat down near the tallest cypress, back against its trunk. The roots twisted beneath him like veins through flesh. From his pouch, he pulled the notebook, then the red ribbon, then the stone with the M, then the stub of candle, the rose. He laid each item before him carefully. Then he opened the notebook to the last page. It was blank. He wrote, "I have walked this city until its bones became mine. I have spoken names into the fog. I have stood where others fled. I have heard the silence of the dying and the thunder of absence. I do not know if any of it matters, but I was here." He paused, then added, "And if someone finds this, then I am still here." He closed the notebook and placed it atop the others. The sun touched the horizon now, setting the city aglow for one final breath. He removed his mask, let the wind kiss his face, and he waited, not for death, but for stillness. And in that stillness, he heard something. Footsteps, soft, deliberate. He opened his eyes. A figure approached from the tree line, small, cloaked. The child? The girl? No, someone older now, eyes wide, familiar. She sat beside him without speaking. She held the same doll from the blue house. "I looked for you," she said. His breath caught. "Am I?" he began, but she shook her head. "No, not yet." He stared at her, at the eyes, at the curve of her mouth. His daughter, grown, alive, real? She took his hand. "You remembered me," she whispered. And for the first time, he allowed the tears to come, not as grief, but as proof that he had lived. They sat in silence for a long time, the doctor and the girl who might have been his daughter. The wind combed to the grass like unseen fingers, stirring the small offerings he had placed at the base of the tree. The red ribbon fluttered. The rose remained still. She didn't speak, nor did she let go of his hand. The sun had dipped beyond the far hills, leaving only a wash of deep blue and purple across the sky, dotted by the first timid stars. The hush of twilight folded around them like a shroud. But it didn't feel heavy. It felt sacred. He glanced down at her again, uncertain whether she was real or simply what his mind had conjured in its final, flickering efforts. "What is your name?" he asked, voice barely above breath. She looked at him, soft, steady. "You already know." He wanted to believe. "I lost you," he whispered. "No," she said. "You carried me." He felt something shift in his chest. Not pain, not illness, just something loosening, something letting go. She turned to the cypress tree and reached into the earth with her fingers, pulling forth a small, smooth stone, just like the one he'd been given earlier. She held it out to him. It bore no letter, just the shape of a heart. He took it with trembling hands and placed it beside the M stone. "Do you still remember their names?" she asked. He nodded. "All of them." "Then they're still here." She looked out across the field. The wind picked up again, and with it, whispers. Not words, not screams, just presence. The air itself seemed to hum with names. Too many to hear clearly, but not so many as to lose meaning. He stood slowly, joints aching. But there was strength now in his limbs, as if memory had made him whole again. She stood with him. He gathered his belongings, the notebook, the stones, the ribbon, the rose. All went back into his coat, except the candle stub. He placed it at the base of the tree, beside the root, and lit it with a match he hadn't known he still carried. The flame flickered, held, burned, not for him, but for them, for everyone who was, he murmured. She stepped back, watching him. Then, without warning, she kissed his forehead. "You can rest now," she said. He turned to reply, but she was already walking away, toward the woods, toward the stars. He didn't follow. Instead, he sat once more. The candle burned low beside him. He listened to the names, to the silence, to the truth. He was not forgotten. He had remembered, and maybe that was enough. The candle's flame wavered as the wind shifted. Around him, night fully settled, painting the sky in deep indigo. The stars blinked above like distant, dispassionate eyes. From the hill, Florence looked like a slumbering beast, breathing slowly, grieving quietly. He did not sleep. Instead, he kept vigil. He had spent so many nights fighting sleep, fearing what dreams might bring, or worse, what they might take. But tonight, he watched the dark without fear, not as a man waiting to die, but as someone who had finally been seen. A rustling came from beyond the trees, not threatening, deliberate. Footsteps again. Another visitor? He turned, expecting perhaps another child, another memory given shape. Instead, a man approached, tall, cloaked, wearing the distinct mask of a fellow doctor, long-beaked, eyes hidden beneath smoked glass. He stopped a few paces away and nodded. "Good evening," the figure said, voice low, dry. The doctor inclined his head in return. "Are you still walking, too?" The figure chuckled softly. "For now." They stood in silence, two silhouettes beneath the trees. "I thought I was the last," the doctor admitted. "You are," said the figure. "But I'm not real." The doctor looked again. And indeed, something about the figure shifted subtly with the breeze, like smoke given bones. "Then why are you here?" he asked. "To remind you," the figure replied, "that you were never walking alone." The doctor breathed deeply. Do they know?" "They do now," the figure said, "because you carried them." He stepped forward and produced a small bundle, tied with twine, paper brittle. "Letters, the same ones left at the fountain." "You kept them," the doctor whispered. The figure nodded. "Words are heavier than bodies." The doctor reached for them, but the figure pulled them back slightly. "They belong here now," he said, walking over to the base of the cypress tree and laying the bundle gently beside the candle, whose flame was now a trembling sliver of gold. A gust of wind nearly extinguished it, but not quite. "I've forgotten so much," the doctor murmured, "but not the names." The figure turned toward him. "And that is why you remain." The two stood for a while, watching the candle burn lower. "I won't be here much longer," the doctor finally said. "No," the figure agreed, "but your silence will." The doctor raised a brow beneath his mask. "That's a strange comfort. It's the only kind we have left." They shared no farewell, no ritual, no blessing. The figure turned and walked back toward the trees, vanishing slowly into the dark, fading not like a man, but like an ideal letting go. The doctor sat once more. He felt the earth beneath him, solid and old. He placed his hand over the satchel at his side and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, he would not rise, not because he had failed, but because his task was complete. He had walked, he had remembered, and in doing so, he had survived longer than most. Dawn crept toward the hill without sound. The sky softened from black to gray, bleeding pale light into the shadows below. Birds stirred, not with songs, but with cautious, fragmented calls. Like they, too, were unsure the sun would return. The doctor sat motionless beneath the cypress, the candle now extinguished, its stub hardened and cold. He was still, but not lifeless. Not yet. A single ray of gold touched the field. The city below remained cloaked in half-dark, but up here, the light struck true. It touched the mask in his lap. It brushed the rose resting near his hand. It found the notebook tucked beside him, its cover worn, the thread holding its spine frayed but intact. And it found the ribbon, twisted around his fingers. He did not stir. He did not speak. He simply existed, not as a man, but as a memory made flesh. From the edge of the hill, a small figure watched. The child, the one who had brought in the cat. She stepped carefully between the stones, her hands clasped in front of her. She wore the same frayed cloak, but her face was cleaner now, her eyes steady. She approached slowly, reverently, stopping just short of the tree. Her gaze fell on the items laid out before him. The rose, the stones, the letter bundle, the burned-down candle. She crouched and touched nothing. Instead, she sat beside him and waited. A breeze lifted a few petals from the ground, swirling them through the grass like echoes of a vanished garden. The girl looked up at the sky, then at the city. Then she did something simple. She opened her satchel. From it, she pulled a blank notebook. She opened the first page and began to write. Not quickly, not frantically, patiently, deliberately. She glanced once at the doctor, then continued writing. The title at the top of the page was clear: The Man Who Remembered. As the sun rose higher, more children appeared. From the forest path, from the far edge of the city, from the broken gates. They came quietly, bearing nothing but themselves. And they, too, sat near the cypress. Some began gathering stones. Others picked a few flowers still blooming in the weeds. One brought a stub of wax and placed it where the candle had once burned. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because silence, when shared, becomes something else entirely. The girl closed the notebook gently. She placed it beside the doctor, then stood. The others followed, and together they left, not in mourning, but in honor, down the hill, back to the broken city, carrying the memory of the one who carried so many. In the days that followed, the hill changed. It did not bloom, nor did it shine. It simply shifted. The wind that passed through the cypress tree no longer howled, but whispered, not with grief, but with memory. Those who visited the hill brought small tokens. Some left stones marked with names. Others pressed flowers between pages of paper and buried them in the soil. A few brought wax and relit the candle. Even if only for a moment, no one disturbed the doctor. He remained beneath the tree, surrounded by the things he carried and those left behind. The notebook sat unopened now, its contents complete. But in time, someone made a copy, then another, then several, until, in quiet corners of the city, people read its pages aloud by firelight, whispering names that had almost vanished. Alessandro, Margot, Sister Beatrice, the boy with the wooden horse, the baker's wife, and a man with no name who remembered them all. The blue door in the pale house remained ajar. Sometimes, children slipped letters into its cracks. Letters to no one, letters to someone. They were never answered, but never returned. The hospital, once a place of death, was slowly emptied of its shadows. The broken beds were carried away. The halls were swept, not restored. No one dared speak of healing, but cleaned, respected. A rose bush began to grow near its entrance. No one planted it. No one watered it, but still it bloomed. The girl who had brought the cat returned to the hill every seventh day. She brought no flowers, no food, only stories. She would sit near the cypress and speak, softly but with conviction. Sometimes tales of people she'd met, sometimes words she barely understood. Once, she simply sat and said nothing, and the silence answered her. One morning, she arrived to find a doctor's mask missing from his lap. Where it had rested, a sprout now grew, impossibly green, impossibly alive. She smiled and left her ribbon behind, tying it to a low branch where the wind could carry its color. Far below, the city stirred. Its bells were still silent, but not from fear, only reverence, because once there had been a man who walked its streets in silence, and now the silence spoke of him. Years passed. The city healed in fragments, never fully. Some streets were rebuilt. Others remained ruins, swallowed by ivy and moss. The plague had left its mark too deeply to be erased, and no one tried to. Instead, Florence began to remember, not through monuments or statues, but through pages. A small building near the edge of the market square was reopened. Once a butcher's shop, now it bore a new sign carved into simple wood, the House of the Names. Inside there were no sermons, no saints, only shelves. Hundreds of notebooks, each one handwritten, filled with names, drawings, fragments of stories. Some pages had only dates. Others held entire lives. And in the center of the room sat a desk. Behind it, the girl, now grown, her hair braided simply, her clothes plain. She wore no mask, though one sat above the desk, not for protection, but for remembrance. Visitors came from nearby villages, carrying torn scraps, names half remembered, questions with no answers. She welcomed them all. She never asked who they had lost. She only asked, "What would you like remembered?" Children brought the names of pets. Fathers brought the names of daughters. Sons brought the names of midwives, shepherds, thieves, bakers. And she wrote them, one by one, always in ink, always with care. Each evening, she would return home, place her pen beside a single candle stub that had never been lit since it was retrieved from the hill, and sit in silence. Sometimes she dreamed of the doctor, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as a man walking, always walking, through fog, through fire, through a world that had forgotten itself. He never looked back in those dreams. He didn't have to. She carried that for him now. In one of the shelves, tucked inside a glass case, lay the original notebook, faded, fragile, sealed behind old oak panels. On the first page, a simple inscription: "To remember is to resist disappearance." No one knew who wrote that line, But those who read it often return with more names, because names spoken or written are seeds, and even in plague-torn soil, some seeds bloom. One evening, decades after the fog had lifted, a traveler arrived at Florence. Not young, not old, wrapped in a weather-worn cloak, boots caked with dust from many cities. He spoke little, observed much. When asked his purpose, he would only reply, "I'm searching for silence." He wandered the market square, past the old wells and the moss-covered fountains. He watched the children play among stones carved with initials. He paused at the rose bush blooming near the old hospital gate. He knelt, touched a petal, and whispered a name. And then he found it, the house of the names. Inside, the candles were dim. A few visitors stood quietly by the shelves, flipping pages, as if each one held a breath from past. The archivist, now older, sat behind her desk, ink staining her fingertips. The traveler approached slowly. "I brought something," he said. She looked up, eyes steady. "What would you like remembered?" He placed a small object on the desk, a glass vial, inside of which floated a single red ribbon. The archivist's breath caught, not from recognition, but from something deeper. Reverence. "Her name?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "She said it once, but I think it was meant for wind, not for books." She nodded and opened a new page. He watched her write. Just a few lines. No date, no description. Only this: the girl who waited beside the man who remembered. When she finished, he took a seat near the back of the room. Hours passed. He didn't move. He simply listened to pages turning, to quiet sobs, to children whispering aloud the names they had learned. Outside, the moon rose, and inside, no one noticed a man fading, not as a spirit, not as a myth, but as a silence he had once carried. Only the archivist looked up, sensing the absence. She didn't speak. She only opened the original notebook, brittle and ancient now, and turned to the last page. She added a final sentence beneath his last entry. "He was here. He remembered. And now we do too." Then she closed the book for the last time, not as an ending. "Still awake? Really? If you made it to the end, you might be the only one. Most people don't even last 15 minutes. So go ahead, prove it. Leave a candle emoji in the comments. And when you're ready to drift off again, click on the next quiet story. It's waiting for you. But as a promise,